Hi, this is Andy Filipiak in Toronto for the week of March the 20th. Well, the U.S. banking crisis continues. There's currently $18 trillion of bank deposits in the U.S. system. Approximately 85% are uninsured. Now, U.S. authorities have come out and stated recently that they will insure all bank deposits. However, that doesn't change the situation where many of these banks are only paying 0.5% to depositors, whereas depositors can now easily move money to treasury bills or bonds, government bonds, or money market funds and earn close to 4 to 5% on that money. Now, one of the best explanations as to how this crisis began was from Jim Bianco at Bianco Research out of Chicago. Over the past year, the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates from roughly 0 to 4.5%. And over the course of these raising of rates, the banking system in the U.S. raised the cost of loans to react to the rise in bond yields or interest rates. However, unlike in the past, where when banks are raising the cost of borrowing, they are often raising the amount they will pay on deposits. So as a bank raises the cost of a loan, they will, in order to maintain and attract deposits, raise the amount on the deposit, which keeps the spread roughly the same whether rates are going up or down. However, this time it did not happen. Banks typically kept rates at around roughly 0.5%, despite the fact that the Fed was raising from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Now, Bianco claims psychologically what happened when the 2-year Treasury got to 5%. Many of these bank depositors suddenly realized that, hey, I can take money out of a bank where my deposit is not insured, earn 5% on a treasury or a money market, and get a much higher yield than the 0.5% I'm currently earning in the banking system. The question is, why were rates so low in the banking system during this period of time? And the answer is, over the COVID lockdowns, over the past 2 or 3 years, the Federal Reserve printed so much money that ended up in the banking system that the banks did not have to compete for deposits. They basically had as many deposits as they wanted or needed, and even more. So with all of this new money printing showing up in the banking system, there was way too much money for regular economic loans. So as a result, the banks took this money and said, well, we're going to buy U.S. Treasuries, mortgage-backed securities, or sort of longer-term government bonds and pocket the difference between paying 0.5% on a deposit. You can earn much higher on a government bond, and that's basically what they did. Now, one of the benefits of the banking industry is that they can buy, or when they do loans or buy bonds, they can put it into a category called hold to maturity, which means if the bank lends out money or buys a bond, as long as they hold that till maturity, they don't have to market the value of that bond. So as a result, many banks in the U.S. bought longer term bonds, earned a higher spread, and there was no problem on this as long as they held the bonds to maturity. But as Bianco points out, once the Fed raised rates to recently 4.5 to 4.75, this triggered a psychological response where we suddenly saw a large amount of money coming out of the banking system going into higher yielding treasuries or money markets. In fact, Silicon Valley Bank, which is now basically bankrupt, one day saw $40 billion of deposits leave. And as a result, in banking, and this is a result really of the fact that we do things electronically now, there was no way that this bank could honor 40 billion of deposits by either selling the government bonds they bought or pledging them at the Fed window. So this is how the crisis began, was the speed and the movement of deposits out of the banking system. And the irony here is that the Silicon Valley Bank 40 billion deposit heist was 2 days after Federal Reserve Chairman Powell spoke at the Humphrey Hawkins testimony before Congress, stating that he was going to continue to raise rates and that this process would go on longer than many expected in his effort to fight inflation. So the irony here is the Federal Reserve really didn't understand the system that they were operating and controlling. Because, I mean, 48 hours later, you go from talking tightening to now where they've been forced to open the floodgates. So as we proceed here, this situation is still in flux because even with government guarantees on all bank deposits, if you have a bank deposit earning 0.5% on a verbal guarantee from the government versus moving it into, say, a brokerage account or buying treasury bonds directly from the Fed at close to, well, 4.5–5%, I don't see how you stop the flow of funds out of the smaller, weaker banks as we proceed. So we are still in a situation where it is unfolding. It's going to be very difficult to solve, and as a result, markets could be very volatile for months to come. Thanks for watching.